crazy collection of Kink Chronicles continues. Happy Sunday, VCers. It's Matt. Hope everyone is well. As you can see, I've been lazy, and I still have the same records up on the shelves there from, I think it's 3 weeks running now. I will try my best to get motivated and change those out and go with some new theme here in the next few days. Anyway, wanted to continue my series of reviewing Kinks albums. So we get to their third album, third English album, which would actually be in America their fourth or fifth album, because they did the same thing in America that they did with the Beatles and the Stones album, which is leave songs off the British albums and add 45s which weren't on the British albums to make extra albums and extra money. Anyway, we get to the Kink Kontroversy, released November 22nd, 1965. That's the I've always loved that cover there, and Slater-Kinney did a takeoff on this cover some 30 years later in the 90s on one of their albums, which is not a bad album, but it's nowhere near as good as the Kinks, of course. Back is pretty unexciting, just some writing, the song titles. This is surely a late 70s, early 80s repress of this record. Very flimsy record cover, almost just paper cardboard. I got this in Chicago in 1981 in the summer. I remember buying it, and it's a record that I showed in my earlier Kinks video. Also bought the same record store the same day. It's on the Pie record label, which leads me to believe that this is a British pressing, or probably repressing, as I said, and yet there it does says made in England, because they were on reprise in America. Interestingly enough, this album was only ever released in mono. There's no stereo mix ever made. In addition to the vinyl copy, I have the deluxe edition version of the CD, which came out a few years ago in that series of their first album through Muswell Hillbillies. Double CD again with a booklet. You get the original mono record remixed, no stereo since that doesn't exist, but you get some of the 45s that came out around the same time as this record that are not on the album. You get some demos and outtakes and unreleased songs, and at the tag end there's about 5 or 6 live at the BBC recordings. So, Kinks Kontroversy. There is some controversy about whether Kontroversy is the beginning of the Kinks' golden age, or whether the album that came out after this is the true beginning of that. I'm going to go with the album that came out after this, but I'm going to say this was an early indication of what's to come, and a really solid album, the Kinks' first solid album from top to bottom. Their first 2 albums, we'll go with the British because it's too hard to keep track of all the American albums. The first 2 British albums were great in their own way, and they had their moments, and the Kinks were one of the greatest singles bands of all time at that time, the equal of anybody out there, or better than anybody out there, with the exception of Beatles in 64 and 65. So the first 2 albums, well, the Beatles' first few albums, we'll go with Please Please Me with the Beatles and Hard Day's Night. They hit home runs right out of the park every time, in my opinion. All 3 of those Beatles albums are solid top to bottom. You've got the hit records, the things that were on the radio, which are great songs, but the album tracks that weren't hits, weren't on the radio so much, are also really solid, and just the covers and the originals, and just top to bottom great albums, all 3 of those. The Kinks, on the other hand, their first 2 albums, you had greatness, epic songs like You Really Got Me, All Day and All of the Night, Tired of Waiting for You, and Well Respected Man, which are as good as anybody was doing at the time, with the exception of the Beatles, in my opinion. But their first 2 albums was an awful lot of filler, awful lot of covers. Rolling Stones' first few albums had an awful lot of covers, but the Stones were better at doing the blues R&B thing than the Kinks were 99% of the time. So the first 2 Kinks albums, a lot of filler, a lot of it's really good, but a lot of it is just sort of there. None of it is terrible, with the possible exception, well, not possible, with the exception of their cover of Dancing in the Streets, which was pretty awful. But most of their albums, first two albums, just a lot of filler that's so-so at best, and then some standout tracks, and then some absolutely terrific, great tracks. This is the first album that feels like a real album from the start to the finish. This also only has one cover song, interestingly enough, Milk Cow Blues by Sleepy John Estes, which they do a really good job of doing their take on it. It's also the song that starts the album, which is a good start to the album. If I can get to it. Anyway, just a little clip of that. So I don't want to waste too much time or get tagged on here. So the rest of these are all Ray Davies original, with the exception of there is one, maybe two, I'm sure there's one song that Dave Davies wrote, which is I Am Free. Pretty good song. Kind of a country, almost folk country sounding thing. Nice song. But on here you've got Milk Cow Blues starts the album, really good old R&B cover. Ring the Bells comes up next, a Ray song, which is a nice ballad. You get Gotta Get the First Plane Home next, really good upbeat rocker. When I See That Girl of Mine is an album cut that's a standout, a really great song. It's kind of half ballad, half rock and roll song. It's got your typical Ray Davies world weariness, hoping for the best but not really expecting it, which infused so much of his songwriting. That's one thing about the Kinks, that Ray Davies was always an old soul, probably from the time he was a little baby, and so his take on things is a little bit different than, say, the Beatles or the Rolling Stones or the Who or any of those other bands, and that's one of the things that make the Kinks stand out and unique in a good way. I Am Free is the Dave song, first Dave song. It's, like I said, sort of a folk country tinge feel to it. Really, really nice piece of music. Then you get, well, I would say When I See That Girl of Mine, I really like that. That's the first standout song on the album for me. Till the End of the Day, which is still in that You Really Got Me All Day and All of the Night sort of territory. But this wouldn't be the absolute last time that they would go to that well, but it would be pretty close to the end of it. I think Ray pretty much understood that he couldn't just keep writing the same song over and over. Nonetheless, Till the End of the Day is almost as good as You Really Got Me and All Day and All of the Night. It's a great song. It's one of the few truly upbeat and happy songs of joy by the Kinks that don't have that tinge of regret creeping into it. It's just a jump around and shout, and another just one of the greatest pieces of music ever, in my opinion. Rock and roll music, whatever type of music. You go to side two, you got The World Keeps Going Round, kind of another world-weary Ray song, saying that you got your problems, but life's going to happen, and whatever happens, the world just keeps on going, and not much you can do about it. I'm on an Island, kind of a goofy, fun song, but also sort of another song of loneliness, just feeling like you're all alone in the world. Then you go to the other great standout, one of my favorite Kink songs of all times, Where Have All the Good Times Gone? That's a very upbeat and slow, draggy, weary song at the same time. I don't know how they do that, but they did it. And it's anyway, one of the greatest songs, one of the Kinks' greatest, and one of rock and roll's greatest songs. It's looking back on old times and wondering why now's not like it used to be, but also accepting that there's good things now. Then you finish off the album with It's Too Late, What's in Store for Me, and You Can't Win, all of which are good songs, if not essential or great songs. So it's great. Good album. Good album. They would get better on their next one. Let's get off that before we get tagged. The bonus disc on the CD, you get Dedicated Follower of Fashion, one of their great 45s of all time, Sitting on a Sofa, the B-side of that single, which is a great one. I'm Not Like Anybody Else, Everybody Else, I'm sorry. Another great song. Time Will Tell. And then you get the BBC and some of the remix stuff. So, solid album. This is their first great album, I would say, even though they would make better beginning with the next album through the next few albums. Like I said, the first two albums, you could probably get by with the Greatest Hits compilation, where you're going to get All Day and All of the Night, You Really Got Me, and Dedicated Follower of Fashion, and Well Respected Man, all those songs. You're going to be missing out on some stuff, because there are some great things on the first and second album. But this is the first album where you probably need to get the album, not count on the greatest hits, because the only thing off here that was close to a hit would have been Till the End of the Day and Where Have All the Good Times Gone. And there's a lot of great songs on here otherwise. And Ray is starting to grow as a songwriter, as a social observer, sort of a British kitchen sink film set to music. So check it out. Kinks Kontroversy, scale of 1 to 10. I'm going to give it a 9.99, just because what comes after is even better. But yeah, 9.99 we'll go with. Have a good weekend, everybody, and we'll see you later.